The Rancher's Reckoning, A Tale of Blood, Justice and Silver. Chapter 1. The Devil's Doorstep. The sun hung low and merciless over the New Mexico Badlands, turning the air into liquid fire. Jacob Pierce wiped the grit from his eyes and immediately regretted it. His hands were caked with 3 days' worth of trail dust, and now his vision blurred with stinging tears. He'd been tracking strays along the eastern boundary of his new property. When he saw them, 2 figures hung from a massive cottonwood tree, arms spread wide and lashed to horizontal branches, bodies stretched in a grotesque mockery of crucifixion. Their feet barely grazed the ground, forcing all their weight onto shoulders that had long since given up screaming. They were Navajo women, young, maybe 20, maybe younger, hard to tell through the layers of dried blood and desert dust that covered them like a second skin. Whip marks crisscrossed their backs in a brutal lattice of pain. Their heads hung forward, hair matted with sweat and sand. Jacob's horse nickered nervously. Sensing death in the air, for a long moment, Jacob sat frozen in the saddle. He was 43 years old, a veteran of a war he tried not to think about, and a man who'd learned that in the territories, other people's suffering was just landscape. You rode past it. You kept moving. You survived. The wind shifted, carrying a sound so faint he almost missed it. A breath. Ragged, wet, determined. One of them was still alive. Jacob looked around. Nothing but scrub brush and heat. Shimmer for miles in every direction. The cabin he'd bought sat maybe 200 yards behind him, silent and waiting. No witnesses, no help. No law this far from town. If he cut them down, he'd be declaring war on whoever put them there. If he didn't, he'd have to live with riding past while they died. Jacob dismounted. His knife was old cavalry issue, blade worn smooth from 1,000 shots. It caught the dying sunlight as he approached the tree, and for just a second, it looked less like a tool and more like a promise. He cut the first rope. The woman collapsed into his arms like a sack of bones wrapped in leather. She didn't cry out, just exhaled, a sound of such profound relief it made Jacob's chest tight. He lowered her gently to the ground and turned to the second woman. This one's eyes snapped open the moment he touched the rope. Black eyes, clear and fierce despite everything. They locked onto his face with an intensity that made him pause. She wasn't asking for mercy. She was measuring him. Jacob cut the second rope. She crumpled, but caught herself halfway down, refusing to fall completely. Her legs shook, but she stayed upright on her knees, breathing through gritted teeth. "Can you walk?" Jacob asked quietly. The conscious woman looked toward the cabin, then back at him. When she spoke, her voice was like gravel grinding against bone. "They will kill you for this, probably." Jacob slid his arms under the unconscious woman, lifted her with a grunt. "But that's tomorrow's problem." He carried them both to the cabin, the first over his shoulder, the second stumbling beside him, using him as a crutch. The whole way Jacob could feel eyes on his back. Real or imagined, it didn't matter. The desert had witnessed what he'd done, and the desert always talked. Chapter 2. Blood money. Inside the cabin, Jacob laid them on his bedroll, the only soft thing in a house that contained exactly 1 chair, 1 table, and a lifetime's worth of regret. The unconscious woman remained still, her breathing shallow but steady. The other sat with her back against the wall, watching Jacob with those unnerving black eyes. "Water," she said. Not a request. A statement of fact. Jacob brought his canteen. She drank slowly, controlling each swallow despite what must have been desperate thirst. Discipline. Training. This was no helpless victim. This was a warrior who'd been caught. Name's Jacob Pierce, he offered, more to fill the silence than anything else. She studied him for a long moment. "Ayesha, what happened?" "They wanted answers. We didn't give them." "Who's they?" Ayesha's lips curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "The men who sold you this land." Jacob felt ice water replace the blood in his veins. He'd known the price was too good. 300 acres with water access, a standing cabin, and fertile bottomland, all for a fraction of market value. The land agent, a sweaty man named Calloway, had practically shoved the deed into his hands. Previous owner left in a hurry, Calloway had said, not meeting Jacob's eyes. Didn't even take his belongings. Lucky for you. Lucky. Jacob walked to the window, scanning the horizon. Still nothing, but that meant nothing in the territories. You didn't see trouble coming until it was kicking your door down. Why were they torturing you? He asked without turning around. To find out where my sister hid the proof. Proof of what? Ayesha shifted, pain flickering across her face. The maps. The reason 3 families have disappeared from this land in 2 years. Jacob turned slowly. Silver. Under your feet. Enough to make men rich. Enough to make them kill. She gestured weakly at the floorboards. Your predecessor found the vein. Started documenting it. They couldn't have that. So they made him disappear, sold the land cheap to the next fool, and waited for the same thing to happen. And you. My people have hunted these lands for generations. We knew something was wrong when settlers kept arriving and vanishing. My sister and I were investigating when they caught us. Her eyes hardened. They've been hanging people on this property for months, letting the coyotes and buzzards do the cleaning, letting fear do the rest. Jacob felt his hands curl into fists. He'd spent 15 years after the war trying to be a different man, trying to build instead of destroy, to plant instead of burn. He'd scraped together every dollar from freight hauling and ranch work to buy this land, to finally have something of his own, and it had all been a trap. The maps, Jacob said quietly. Where are they? Ayesha's smile was sharp as broken glass. Right under your feet. Literally. Chapter 3. What lies beneath the loose floorboard was near the stove, just slightly higher than the others. The wood grain running the wrong direction. Jacob had noticed it the day he moved in and assumed it was just shoddy craftsmanship. Now he pried it up with his knife. Underneath was a hollow space, maybe 8 inches deep. Inside, a leather satchel, edges worn and stained with something dark. Jacob lifted it carefully, feeling the weight of papers within. He opened it on the table. Ayesha dragged herself over to watch, her sister still unconscious but breathing steadily. Maps. Dozens of them, hand-drawn diagrams showing shaft depths, or samples, geological surveys. The writing was meticulous, almost obsessive, the work of a man who knew he was documenting his own death warrant. A name was written on the first page, Samuel Whitmore. Your predecessor, Ayesha said. Mining engineer from Colorado. Came here looking for silver, found it, and had the poor judgment to be honest about it. Jacob rifled through the papers, assay reports. Estimated values. A vein running nearly 300 feet deep, high-grade ore, worth potentially millions, and a list of names: Calloway, Bridger, Knox, Dutch. The partnership, Ayesha said. Calloway sells the land cheap. Bridger handles the disappearances. He's the one who supervised our entertainment. She touched her wrists, still raw and bleeding. Knox runs the mining operation once they clear the complications. And Dutch handles the buyers once the silver comes out. Where's Dutch now? Probably in his office in Santa Fe, counting money and pretending he doesn't know why settlers keep vanishing. Ayesha's expression was ice. They're careful. They never do the dirty work where witnesses can testify. Out here, you can scream all you want. The only thing listening is the desert. Jacob closed the satchel. His mind was racing, calculating odds and outcomes. For men with money, connections, and a proven willingness to torture and kill, against 1 broken-down cavalry veteran and 2 traumatized Navajo women, the smart play was obvious. Grab the maps. Ride to the nearest marshal, hand everything over, and hope the law actually cared about dead Indians and missing settlers. But Jacob had lived in the territories long enough to know how that story ended. The law moved slow. Money moved fast, and witnesses had a way of disappearing before trials ever began. They'll come tonight, Ayesha said, reading his face. They know we're not hanging anymore. They'll come to finish it, burn the evidence, and put you in the ground with the others. How many? At least 6, maybe more. Bridger doesn't take chances. 6 armed men against a crippled veteran with a rifle and 12 rounds of ammunition. Jacob walked to the window. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of blood and copper. In the distance, he could see the cottonwood tree where he'd found the women, its branches empty now, but somehow still menacing. He thought about Samuel Whitmore, documenting his discoveries right up until the moment they killed him. He thought about the other settlers who'd bought this land, full of hope and plans, only to end up feeding the coyotes. He thought about all the times in his life he'd looked the other way, told himself it wasn't his fight, convinced himself that survival mattered more than principle. "There's a root cellar," Jacob said, not turning around. "When they come, you and your sister hide there. No matter what you hear, you stay hidden until dawn. Then you take the maps and ride for Fort Sumner. Find a marshal who hasn't been bought yet. Make sure this gets documented. And you?" Jacob checked his revolver, Winchester 73, well maintained, but old. 12 rounds in the magazine. 1 in the chamber. He had a Colt revolver, 6 shots, and a hunting knife that had seen him through the war. Not nearly enough. "I'm going to make them earn it," he said quietly. Ayosha pulled herself to her feet, swaying but standing. "My people are 2 days' ride from here. If you can hold until tomorrow night, they won't wait that long. Then we fight. Together." Jacob looked at her, this woman who'd been tortured for days and could barely stand, now offering to die beside a stranger who'd cut her down. "You can't even hold a gun. Watch me." For the first time since the war, Jacob smiled a real smile, the kind that acknowledged the beautiful absurdity of doomed bravery. "All right then. Let's show these bastards what it costs to hunt people for sport." Outside, the desert wind picked up, carrying the sound of approaching hoofbeats. The reckoning was coming. Chapter 4. The Siege of Devil's Acre. They came at dusk. When the light played tricks and shadows grew long. Jacob counted 7 riders spreading out in a loose semicircle around the cabin, professional, experienced. This wasn't their first time surrounding a homestead. Bridger dismounted in front a big man with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held all the warmth of a January blizzard. He carried a rifle casually, like a man who'd never questioned his right to use it. "Jacob Pierce." His voice carried across the yard. "We just want to talk." Jacob crouched beside the window, rifle resting on the sill. Ayasha was positioned at the back window, her sister finally conscious and armed with Jacob's spare pistol despite hands that trembled. "Talk from there," Jacob called back. Bridger chuckled, a sound like rocks grinding together. "Found something interesting in your cabin, did you? Something that doesn't belong to you. Everything in this cabin came with the deed. That makes it mine. See, that's where you're wrong." Bridger took a step forward. "That land came with conditions. Previous owner didn't honor them. That's why he's not here anymore. And the 2 women you strung up, trespassers. We were within our rights." Jacob felt his finger tighten on the trigger. 1 shot, sent to mass, and Bridger would go down. But that would start the shooting, and 7 against 3 were bad odds in anyone's mathematics. "Here's what's going to happen," Bridger continued. "You're going to send out those women and the satchel. Then you're going to sign the deed over to Mr. Calloway, who generously offered to buy back the property. You'll get your money back, plus a little extra for your trouble. Everyone walks away. And if I don't, then we burn you out. Might find your body in the ashes, might not. Either way, the land reverts to the territory, and we buy it at auction. Only difference is how much pain you experience between now and then." Jacob looked at Aya. Her jaw was set, eyes blazing. She gave a small shake of her head. "Some lines, once crossed, changed who you were forever." "No deal," Jacob called out. The silence that followed was heavy as a gravestone. Then Bridger sighed. "Shame. I actually liked you, Pierce. You seemed smarter than the others." He raised his hand. The shooting started. The first volley tore through the cabin walls like they were paper. Wood splinters exploded inward. Glass shattered. Jacob dropped below the window, ears ringing, heart hammering. He rose, fired twice. One of the riders went down, clutching his shoulder. The others scattered, taking cover behind their horses and the sparse brush. Ayasha fired from the back window 3 shots. deliberate and aimed. Jacob heard a scream, saw another rider stumble, but they kept coming. A torch arced through the air, landed on the roof. Flames caught in the old, dry timber, almost instantly. Smoke began pouring through the ceiling cracks. Jacob fired again. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder, familiar and true. Another rider down. But there were still 4, and they were flanking, surrounding. The back door exploded inward. A man rushed through, pistol drawn. Ayesha's sister shot him point blank, the report deafening in the enclosed space. The man fell backward, crashing into the doorframe. Jacob swung around, saw Bridger climbing through a window. Bridger returned fire, the bullet grazing Jacob's ribs. White-hot pain lancing through his side. They collided in the center of the cabin, too close for guns. Jacob drove his shoulder into Bridger's chest, slamming him against the wall. They grappled, fighting for leverage, for control. Bridger was younger, heavier, meaner. He drove a knee into Jacob's injured ribs, and the world went white with agony. Jacob's grip loosened. Bridger's hand found his throat. Then Ayesha brought a Castian skillet. Down on Bridger's skull, the big man dropped like a felled tree. Jacob gasped, clutching his side. Blood seeped between his fingers. The roof was fully ablaze now, flames spreading fast. Smoke filled the cabin, choking, blinding. "We have to get out," Ayesha shouted. "The cellar, they'll be waiting. We go through the fire, or we die in it." Jacob grabbed the satchel, stuffed it inside his shirt. Ayesha helped her sister to her feet. Together, they staggered toward the door. The remaining riders were regrouping. Preparing for a final assault, Jacob raised his rifle with trembling hands. 3 rounds left, 3 men still standing. The odds hadn't improved. Then the drums started. Chapter 5. The cavalry of the forgotten. The sound rolled across the desert like distant thunder, steady, rhythmic, ancient war drums. The 3 remaining riders froze, looking toward the eastern ridge. Riders poured over the crest like a flood, dozens of them, spreading out in a crescent formation. Navajo warriors on painted horses, moving with the coordinated precision of men who'd fought together for generations. Leading them was a man Jacob would later learn was called Red Hawk, Ayesha's brother. Alerted by scouts who'd seen the smoke, the siege broke instantly. The remaining attackers tried to flee, but they were surrounded, cut off. 2 surrendered immediately. The 3rd made a run for it, and was dragged from his saddle before he'd made it 50 yards. Bridger, still groggy from Ayesha's skillet work, was hauled to his feet and bound with his own rope. The cabin groaned, then collapsed in on itself with a shower of sparks and burning timber. Jacob watched his new life, his fresh start. His hope for something better reduced to ash and memory. Red Hawk dismounted, walked straight to Ayesha, and embraced her fiercely. They spoke in rapid Navajo, too quick for Jacob to follow. Then, Red Hawk turned to Jacob, studying him with eyes that weighed and measured. "You could have fled," Red Hawk said, in perfect English. "The moment you saw trouble coming, you could have ridden away." "So could you," Jacob replied. Red Hawk smiled a warrior's smile, acknowledging a truth that needed no further explanation. Chapter 6. Justice in the desert, they bound the survivors and made camp in the ruins of Jacob's homestead. As the fire burned down to embers, Jacob, Ayesha, and Red Hawk sat in council. The satchel of maps spread between them. "Callaway, Knox, and Dutch are still free," Red Hawk said. "These men were just the hired guns. The true criminals are in Santa Fe, protected by money and distance." "Not for long," Jacob said. He pulled out a sheaf of papers, not maps, but something better. Bank records, transfer documents, contracts signed by all 4 partners. Samuel Whitmore hadn't just documented the silver, he'd documented the conspiracy. "We ride to Santa Fe," Jacob said. "We bring these documents to the territorial governor. We make enough noise that they can't bury this." "They'll kill us before we get there," Ayesha said quietly. "Maybe, probably." Jacob looked at the burned remnants of his cabin. "But I'm tired of watching evil men win, because good men stay quiet. I'm tired of looking the other way." Red Hawk nodded slowly. My people will ride with you, all the way to Santa Fe if needed. These men have hunted us for sport, used our lands as burial grounds. No more. The captured men were taken to the nearest fort, testimony secured. Confessions extracted, not through torture, but through the terrifying realization that the cavalry wasn't coming to save them this time. The ride to Santa Fe took 4 days. They arrived like Ayasha, Red Hawk, and 30 Navajo warriors, all carrying documents, witnesses, and the kind of righteous fury that couldn't be bought off or intimidated. The territorial governor, faced with evidence he couldn't ignore and warriors he couldn't threaten, had no choice but to act. Calloway was arrested trying to flee the territory. Knox was found in his office, already working on his defense. Dutch, the smartest of them, had disappeared, but his bank accounts were frozen. His partners eager to testify against him in exchange for lighter sentences. The trial was swift. The evidence overwhelming. All 4 men were convicted. 2 hanged, 2 sentenced to life in territorial prison. And the land that cursed, blood's silver-rich land was deeded jointly to Jacob Pierce and the Navajo Nation, to be developed fairly, with profits shared equally. Epilogue. What grows in ashes 2 years later? Jacob stood on the same spot where his cabin once burned. In its place was a new structure, larger, stronger, built from stone and good timber. Not a cabin, a house. Beside it was a trading post, where Navajo craftspeople sold their goods, and settlers could buy supplies. Fair prices. Honest dealings. No one disappeared anymore. The silver mine operated 3 days a week, with strict safety protocols and fair wages for all workers. The profits were divided as promised, half to Jacob, half to Red Hawk's people. Everyone prospered. Ayosha walked up beside him, her hands dusty from working in the garden they'd planted where the gallows tree once stood. She'd stayed, not out of gratitude or obligation, but because somewhere between torture and survival, between fire and justice, she and Jacob had found something neither expected: partnership, trust, love. Red Hawk sent word, she said. They caught Dutch in California. He's being extradited back for trial. Good. Jacob didn't feel triumphant, just complete. That closes the last chapter. No, Ayasha took his hand. It opens a new one. She placed his hand on her belly, and Jacobe felt it, the subtle flutter of new life. Growing where death had once reigned, he pulled her close. Looking out over land that had tried to kill him, and failed. Land that had been purchased with blood, and reclaimed with courage. The desert wind blew warm and clean, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. What do we tell our child? Ayasha asked. About all of this. Jacob thought about Samuel Whitmore, documenting truth until it killed him. He thought about the settlers who'd died alone and forgotten. He thought about every time in his life he'd chosen comfort over conscience. We tell them, he said finally, that evil only wins when good people decide their own peace is more important than other people's lives. We tell them that standing your ground isn't about being fearless, it's about being afraid and standing anyway. And if they ask if it was worth it, all the pain and blood and fear. Jacob looked at the house they'd built from ruins, at the community growing around them, at the woman beside him and the child they'd created from ashes. We tell them to look around, he said, and decide for themselves.